It was a very common practice that the naming of engines was adopted by many drivers and companies. However, it took a rather long time for companies to officially name a route. Drivers would nickname a particular route themselves. However, it wasn't until 1877 that a company would name a train, despite what engine that pulled it. It would be nearly 30 years before the next named train route would grace the track. This time, the Great Western took it on board and named the now famous Cornish Riviera to the Paddington to Plymouth route, with others quickly following suit. After the grouping of 1923, the Big Four took the naming of train routes to a whole new level. In just 10 years, there was no less than 56 officially titled train routes. The majority of them were expresses and routes that are of considerable pride to their respective companies. In July of 1927, the LMS ran a new service along its usual Euston to Glasgow route. The long train comprised of the best the LMS had to offer and had been a staple run long since the grouping. The train was previously under the care of the LNWR. It left Euston every day at 10 AM, and with a second train leaving Glasgow at 2. The twin trains would take 8.5 hours to reach their destinations and was under a strict timetable to ensure connections to other railways were not missed. This new train route would also be the very top of what the LMS could offer. The only difference is it would be virtually non-stop. The engine ran non-stop to Carnforth, where an engine check was performed to ensure everything was well and to change crews if required. Then the train carried on to Symington, where it was sent either to Edinburgh or to Glasgow, dependent on the journey. The route was powered by a mix of medium-powered engines, such as the LNWR Claughton classes and the Midland Compound 440s. The LMS had inherited the Midlands Railway's small engine policy when it came to engines on the West Coast Main Line. It meant they simply couldn't invest on high-power engines for its expresses, meaning most Royal Scots were at first double-headed. The 236-mile route would be a new record for the LMS and a record for the UK as a whole. No other train had travelled this far without stopping. But the LNER was hot on the LMS's heels, and not to be outdone, they claimed the record for themselves with an impressive run of 268 miles non-stop with its newest engines, the A3s. The GWR and the Southern Railway could only watch as the battle of the East and West Coast Main Line raged between the LMS and the LNER. The LMS threw away its light engines order. If the LNER wanted a fight, it was on. They replaced the compounds within a month with new 3-cylinder engines to put the LNER in its place. A whole team led by Herbert Chambers with Henry Fowler's input helped in getting the engine from the drawing run at Derby to the sitting on the tracks at the North British Locomotive Company. The new engines were called the LMS Royal Scot class and were introduced with little to no testing. They were designed for heavy express trains with no need for a pilot engine. Within a month it was on the Royal Scot, and the engine number 6100 reclaimed the title with a non-stop run of 299.1 miles to Carlisle. Of course, the LNER was not going to take this lying down, and in true LNER fashion, it decided to make its own rules. The LNER knew that the only thing stopping an engine travelling long distances non-stop was its crew. If they could change the crew en route, then the train wouldn't have to stop. Scoops on the tender took care of the water problem on the go, and the tenders had enough coal capacity for most journeys. In May 1928, Sir Nigel Grensley's new corridor tender was a big blow in the battle. It was put on the world-famous Flying Scotsman, where it made its checkmate run of 392.9 miles non-stop, with the crew changing easily through the newly fashioned corridor into the comfort of a crew coach. The LMS, however, had the last laugh. On the eve of the Flying Scotsman's run, they commissioned 2 one-off Royal Scots. One was pulled by an older compound engine, while the other was pulled by the newer Royal Scot. Both made it to Glasgow and Edinburgh respectively non-stop, earning an impressive 401 miles and 399 miles each. However, in the war rules, as the trains were not running on a daily basis, the distances didn't count, so the Flying Scotsman and the LNER remained king of the long sprinters. There was one rule that both the LNER and the LMS had to stick to no matter what. The minimum journey time must be 8¼ hours, even though the new classes of steam engines could do more and things were held quite nicely until 1932. In 1932, the LNER broke the truce by cutting its Flying Scotsman journey down, not once, but twice, to 7½ hours, and was quick to brag about it. The LNER shaved more and more time off the service until it reached the magic goal of 7 hours. The LMS knew that they were going to struggle to match. The LNER had its corridor tender and it had the easiest, shortest and smoother run, and it didn't have to deal with BTOC, one of the hardest gradients on the network. Still, the LMS responded and cut its time to 7 hours and 40 minutes. But the LMS had an ace in the hand and a Princess Royal in the wings. William Stanier had joined the ranks of the LMS in 1931 and was charged with producing more powerful locomotives. The LMS Princess Royal class was highly popular on the Royal Scot route and were putting up some fine numbers, not only in speed but in the weight that they were moving. But Stanier was just not satisfied with the class. He wanted something to match the Pacific's wheel for wheel, so he designed the Princess Coronation. The Princess Coronation classes would dominate the Royal Scot run and were definitely capable of shattering the current 7-hour and 40-minute barrier. The LNER responded that year with the Coronation train and got to Edinburgh in 6 hours flat. The LMS, armed with Stanier, responded with the Coronation Scot, a 6.5-hour lead. The biggest difference was not in power this time or in size, but in streamlining. The LNER had the A4s, while Stanier built the majority of the new Coronation class with its new streamlining casing and go faster stripes. In 1936, the LMS 6201 Princess Elizabeth took the UK crown as the longest non-stop run with a 401-mile run from Glasgow to Euston. It was also the fastest run as well, in 5 hours and 53 minutes. It's very difficult to say what would have happened between these two railways had World War II not hit. The next barrier these two competed for was pure speed. However, the LMS held the crown for a time of 113 miles an hour. But while they were celebrating, it dawned on them that they only had 1.5 miles to slow down to reach the upcoming station. They slammed all on, but skidded through the station at 57 miles an hour. They should have been approaching at 20. While impressive, it was reckless, and the crew and the LMS were reprimanded for the incident. Both the LMS and the LNER called a truce on the speed race purely down to safety. The LNER needed to test a braking system, however, on its new A4 classes, so in the morning of the 3rd of July 1938, Gresley approached the crew, telling them to gun the engine at Grantham, a straight treacherous track. Joe complied and the speed record was smashed with 126 miles an hour. Now, as with most main trains, Royal Scot was parked for the majority of the war, with its coaches modified for use for troops. But when it resumed in 1953 by British Railways, it sadly didn't reach the heights of its pre-war splendour. Electrification on parts of the line meant that the trains simply couldn't operate as they had done, and the timing suffered as a result. As the railways were nationalised, the train simply wasn't what it was. Timings were changed, the trains couldn't run as fast, and the New Caledonian was outshining it. But for all the negatives, it was still popular with passengers. In the 1960s, steam made way for mainline diesels and electric locomotives. It soon began to lose its prestige. Electrification at Crewe to Glasgow called time on the engine changes, and the new Type 87 took over. It slowly became a part of the timetable, and in 2003, the train lost its name, becoming a simple hourly service hosted by Class 390s, and the average time for the journey is about 4.5 hours, and it pretty much runs non-stop. In 1989, the war of the non-stop steam runs was finally won by the Flying Scotsman, bearing the banner for the LNER. It currently stands at 442 miles, and considering it was done in Australia, it's unlikely to ever be broken, especially by an LMS engine. But the Royal Scot Service still kind of lives on, and the name, Royal Scot, definitely does. 2 engines from the Royal Scot class survive. The LMS giants Royal Scot and Scots Guardsman are both mainline operational and celebrate the best from this amazing line. Scots Guardsman even managed to get one up on Flying Scotsman when it was selected to take the Olympic torch in 2012, owing to the Scotsman being delayed in its overhaul. Both engines work the main line today, taking rail tours, and I am proud to have seen them both working the lines as they pass through York. I am lucky to be living so close to that station and the museum, where it is one of the few places where you can see the best of the LNER and the best of the LMS finally putting its war aside and sitting literally side by side.